The bedrock of any free society is a legal system that is fair, impartial, and trusted by its people. Our judiciary is meant to be a blindfolded arbiter, weighing only the facts and the law. But what happens when the blindfold slips? What happens when the scales of justice seem tipped not by evidence, but by ideology or external pressure? Round the nation, we're seeing a worrying trend, a growing public distrust in our courts. Decisions that appear to defy precedent and logic are making many question if justice is truly blind anymore. This isn't just a political debate. It's an erosion of the very foundation of our republic. When people lose faith in the system designed to protect them, the entire structure becomes fragile. Courageous individuals, lawyers, whistleblowers, and everyday citizens have risked their careers and reputations to sound the alarm. They have spoken out against what they see as a departure from the principles of impartial justice, facing immense personal sacrifice for upholding the rule of law. Their stories remind us that the fight for a fair judiciary is a fight for the soul of our nation. Now is the time for action. We must demand greater transparency and accountability from our judges. We must advocate for reforms that strengthen the separation of powers and insulate our courts from political influence. This includes supporting nonpartisan judicial appointments and robust ethics oversight. The future of our liberty depends on restoring faith in our justice system. Let's work together to ensure that justice remains a promise for all, not a privilege for a few.
I want you to imagine, just for a second, a wildly dramatic trajectory for a human life.
Okay.
Picture yourself facing 23 years in federal prison. Like, actually picture the crushing weight of that number.
That's a lifetime.
Right, it's massive. But then picture actually serving exactly 366 days behind bars, then getting this sweeping day one presidential pardon from a totally new administration. And then rather than just, quietly retreating to a normal life or maybe writing a memoir and disappearing into the woods somewhere, you immediately launch this fierce, aggressive campaign for the United States Congress.
I mean, it's the kind of narrative arc you'd honestly expect to see plotted out on a whiteboard in a Hollywood writer's room.
Exactly.
It sounds like a pure political thriller. But in today's deep dive, we aren't looking at a script. We are looking at the exact timeline and the exact origin story presented by our subject today, John Strand.
Yeah, so let's unpack this. Today, we are really immersing ourselves in a highly charged, incredibly detailed interview with John Strand.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. Our sources cover his personal legal battle stemming from January 6th. They cover his book, Patriot Plea, his laser-like focus on election integrity, and this newly launched platform for the 2026 congressional election.
Yay.
And our mission for this deep dive is to really understand the architecture of his worldview. We want to know how an individual takes a deeply personal, frankly traumatic grievance with the federal justice system and attempts to transform that into a broader national political movement.
Yeah, and before we jump into the mechanics of that transformation, I think it is vital, honestly, really important to set the ground rules for how we are going to navigate this today.
Absolutely.
Because as always, when we dive into highly partisan territory like this, our goal today isn't to validate or debunk these claims. The source material is intensely political. So we are here strictly to pull back the curtain on this specific worldview. We want to map out the argument Strand is making and understand how this rhetoric operates. We are acting as your impartial guides through his logic, so you can clearly understand the ideas shaping this very vocal faction of American politics. We are not endorsing anything, just analyzing.
That is the perfect lens for us to use today. We are just here to read the map. So let's start right at the crucible of Strand's story. January 6th and his collision with the justice system.
Okay.
According to his account in the interview, he didn't go to the Capitol with the intent to protest in the traditional sense. He states he was there specifically to assist Dr. Simone Gold with medical support.
Now, that is a very specific framing we need to look at.
Uh-huh.
For those who might not remember, Dr. Simone Gold is a physician and lawyer who became a highly prominent figure during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, mostly for her opposition to lockdowns.
Exactly, lockdowns and vaccine mandates. So by placing himself alongside her in a supporting medical capacity, Strand is immediately establishing a narrative of service.
He's a medic.
Right. He isn't framing himself as an instigator. He is framing himself as a protector or a medic in a chaotic environment.
And chaotic is exactly how he describes it. He states he was physically pushed into the Capitol building with the surge of the crowd, and ultimately he found himself swept up in what he explicitly describes in the interview as an orchestrated FBI operation.
An orchestrated operation, okay.
Yeah, but here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to get your take on this. It's the specific details of his sentencing. He originally faced 23 years, like we said.
Right.
But the interview highlights this striking, almost poetic detail. He ended up serving exactly 366 days in prison. And he points out that it was 366 days, specifically because it was a leap year. Why focus so heavily on that one extra day?
What's fascinating here is how that specific number functions rhetorically in his origin story. A phrase like "I served a year in prison" sounds almost standard.
Right, it's a round number.
It's a clean round number. But 366 days does something entirely different to the listener. It emphasizes the excruciating drag of time.
Every single day.
Exactly. It highlights every single sunrise and sunset he spent in a cell. Furthermore, emphasizing that it was a leap year paints a picture of a universe, or in this case, a justice system, that is piling on an extra punitive measure.
Like the calendar itself was against him.
Yes. It anchors his trauma in a very specific, undeniable physical reality. It's a brilliant piece of narrative anchoring before he pivots to the broader political implications.
And that pivot happens rapidly in the timeline he presents. The interview operates on a scenario where Donald Trump has won the 2024 election and assumed office.
Which is the context for the whole discussion.
Right. And Strand notes that his imprisonment was suddenly truncated when he was completely pardoned by President Trump on his very first day back in office.
Day one.
Day one. But Strand doesn't frame this pardon as just a lucky break or a political favor. He frames it as a necessary systemic corrective action against what he calls Black Robe Tyranny.
Black Robe Tyranny.
That is a massive accusation. He is leveling a severe systemic critique at the entire federal judiciary.
It really is. And Black Robe Tyranny is truly the bedrock of his current political identity. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Strand isn't just arguing that a jury made a mistake in his specific case, or that the law was misapplied.
No, he's going much further.
Much further. He is arguing that the system itself operated with intentional, premeditated malice. He claims that transcripts from his trial, which he actually encourages people to read, prove that federal prosecutors explicitly lied with the sole intent to imprison him.
But the prosecutors aren't even his main target.
No, the real target of his ire is the judges themselves.
Yeah, he goes after the judges with incredible intensity. He claims these federal judges actively mocked defendants in their courtrooms. He says they spoke ill of the defendants' families and that they harbored a deep, sometimes open hatred for the MAGA movement and for Donald Trump.
It's a total indictment of their neutrality.
Total. Strand asserts that throughout his entire legal process, his constitutional rights were systematically violated. He specifically names his First through his Eighth Amendment rights.
Think about the gravity of this rhetoric for a moment. In the American civic religion, the judge is traditionally viewed as the ultimate neutral arbiter.
The final referee.
They are the final stopgap protecting our constitutional rights. Strand is arguing to his audience that this final stopgap has completely broken the public trust.
Right.
He's telling the listener that the referee isn't just blowing a few bad calls. The referee is actively wearing the opposing team's jersey and is trying to injure the players. It is a fundamental dismantling of faith in the judicial branch.
So if the referee is corrupt, how does he propose we fix the game? Because he isn't just airing a grievance here. He is using this to launch a congressional platform.
He has a plan.
He does. If elected, Strand says his immediate goals involve the aggressive use of impeachment against these federal judges. He also proposes instituting something he calls a 3 strikes for rogue judges policy.
A 3 strikes policy for judges.
Yeah. How would something like that even work in our current system?
That is the million-dollar question, and it represents a profound escalation in political strategy. Traditionally, conservatives have focused on appointing originalist judges to the bench.
Right. changing the makeup of the courts.
Exactly. But Strand is proposing a complete paradigm shift. He is essentially promising to weaponize the legislative branch to actively police discipline and remove members of the judicial branch.
Which is a huge structural change.
Massive. A three-strikes policy implies a legislative oversight committee that grades judicial rulings or behavior, which would be a massive friction point regarding the separation of powers.
The founders might have a few things to say about that.
They definitely would. It shifts the role of a congressman from passing laws to retroactively punishing the interpreters of the law.
It's an incredibly aggressive posture. And to bridge his personal experience in that courtroom with his broader aggressive political philosophy, Strand wrote a book.
Patriot Plea.
Right, Patriot Plea. And the interview points listeners directly to his website to purchase it. It seems to function almost as a manifesto for this specific movement.
Patriot Plea absolutely serves as the ideological scaffolding for his congressional run. He needs a way to contextualize his own imprisonment so it isn't just about him.
It can't just be a personal vendetta.
Right. He doesn't want the reader to view his 366 days in jail as an isolated anomaly. He uses the book to argue that his jail time was merely a late-stage symptom of a much larger systemic disease.
And what does he call that disease?
He labels it a Marxist and leftist rot.
And where does he claim this rot originated? Because he doesn't just blame the law schools.
No, it's much broader.
He claims it has infiltrated the public education system, the broader university system, and that the hostile behavior he experienced from the judiciary is just a downstream byproduct of this cultural decay.
This is a classic sociological argument often found in populist movements. The idea is that institutions have been captured over decades.
The long march through the institutions.
Exactly. If you control the universities, you control the law schools. If you control the law schools, you control the prosecutors and the judges. Therefore, to fix the courts, you have to fix the culture. And to fix the culture, you have to mobilize the citizenry.
Which brings us to his proposed cure. The central thesis of Patriot Plea is what Strand calls a sacred duty. He argues that voter education and civic engagement are not optional hobbies for a Sunday afternoon.
They are mandatory.
Yes. And he specifically targets primary elections, noting that this is where the real ideological battles are fought. Yet it's historically where citizens are the most disengaged.
Turnout in primaries is usually terrible.
Terribly low. But here's the part of his rhetoric that really caught my attention. He doesn't just yell at people to vote. He makes a fascinating psychological pivot.
What does he do?
He openly acknowledges to his audience that it is highly logical and entirely reasonable for them to feel totally disillusioned with the voting process.
This is perhaps his most crucial strategic move. Think about the voter he's trying to reach. This is a voter who likely already believes the system is corrupt.
Right. If they're listening to this, they already distrust the system.
Exactly. So if you just tell them go vote, they will tune you out. Instead, Strand validates their apathy. He says, in essence, you are right to feel like your vote doesn't matter. You are right to feel like the establishment is exploiting you. Your frustration is entirely rational.
By validating that anger, he builds immediate trust. He disarms the skeptic.
Yes.
But then he forcefully redirects that energy.
Yeah.
He tells them the only right way to respond to that exploitation is not to stay home, but to overwhelm the people in power with sheer, undeniable numbers.
If we connect this to the broader history of political mobilization, validating a grievance is always the first step to building a base.
It's organizing 101.
It really is. He is taking the exact reason people stay home, the belief that the system is rigged, and flipping it into the ultimate urgent reason they absolutely must show up. He is trying to turn apathy into righteous indignation, which leads us directly into the core pillar of his entire legislative platform.
Let's transition right into that. Section 3 of our deep dive. The ballot box.
The big issue.
The biggest. We move now to what the interview describes as the absolute most pressing issue for Republicans today. The host of the interview actually suggests this issue might even supersede the border crisis in importance.
That's saying a lot.
It is. And that issue is voter ID and absolute election integrity. The source throws out some massive statistics to back this up. They claim that 95% of Republicans and 85% of all Americans demand voter ID and lockdown elections.
Those figures are rhetorically staggering. By citing 85% of all Americans, Strand is attempting to lift this issue out of the partisan muck.
He's saying it's not even a debate anymore.
Right. He is arguing that this is not a fringe right-wing demand, but a nearly universal common-sense mandate from the American public at large. His implicit argument is that getting 85% of Americans to agree on anything in the 21st century is practically impossible. So a demand with that level of consensus is absolutely non-negotiable for any elected official.
And according to Strand, the primary legislative vehicle to execute this mandate is something called the Save America Act. But rather than focusing entirely on the Democrats opposing this, the interview directs heavy, relentless criticism at his own party.
Specifically, Republican Senator John Thune.
Yes, John Thune. The interview accuses Thune of completely ignoring the Save America Act. They paint him as a protege of Mitch McConnell. They accuse him of lacking political courage and essentially hiding behind Senate procedural rules rather than bringing this vital bill to the floor for a vote.
It's friendly fire.
Heavy friendly fire. What is the subtext of attacking a senior leader in your own party like that?
The subtext is a battle for the very soul of the party. The interview is drawing a hard line between the establishment wing, represented by figures like Thune and McConnell, and the populist Maggier wing that Strand aligns with.
A civil war within the party.
Exactly. By accusing Thune of hiding behind procedural rules, likely referring to the filibuster or committee processes, Strand is arguing that the establishment cares more about decorum and the status quo than they do about securing the republic.
And there's a threat attached to that, too.
The huge threat. The underlying threat presented in the source is stark. The interviewer suggests that this perceived cowardice by establishment Republicans could literally cost the party the midterm elections because the base will refuse to turn out for leaders they view as weak.
That brings up a fascinating contradiction in his platform, though. Strand explicitly claims that the 2020 election was fraudulent and stolen.
Right.
And crucially, he ties his personal origin story back into this, stating he went to federal prison because he stood up against that stolen election. But he asserts that the 2024 victory was legitimate. How does he reconcile that?
He uses a very specific phrase.
Right. Too big to rig.
Too big to rig is an incredibly potent piece of political framing. It functions simultaneously as a battle cry and a psychological coping mechanism for a voting base that has been repeatedly told the system is deeply compromised.
Because otherwise, why vote at all?
Exactly. It tells the voter, yes, your worst fears are true, there is cheating, but your sheer volume, your overwhelming turnout, can essentially short-circuit the fraud machine. It gives the voter a sense of agency in a system they've been told is stacked against them.
It's a way to maintain the narrative of a corrupt system while still demanding participation within it.
It threads the needle perfectly.
But Strand doesn't leave it there. He follows up this concept with a truly apocalyptic ultimatum. He warns that without an absolute ironclad consensus on election integrity, which he defines as one citizen, one vote exclusively for Americans, the constitutional republic will literally cease to function.
The stakes couldn't be higher in his view.
His exact words warn that things will get very ugly very fast.
That is a classic apocalyptic framing designed to create maximum urgency. He is telling you that we are not debating tax policy or highway funding here. We are debating the survival of the nation-state itself.
Right.
If the ballot box fails, he is implying that the social contract is broken, which opens the door to the very ugly alternatives of civil unrest.
And that vibrating sense of urgency is the absolute fuel for his 2026 congressional campaign. Let's look at the origin story he gives for this specific political run, because it is highly cinematic.
It really is.
He describes sitting alone in his federal prison cell and feeling God literally speak to his heart, asking him a direct question. If not me, who? If not now, when?
By framing his decision this way, he elevates his campaign far above a standard political bid for a House seat. He imbues his run with a sense of divine calling and righteous necessity.
It's not about ambition.
No. He isn't running because he wants to draft legislation in committee. He is running because he was called upon in his darkest hour to save the country. And he scales that individual spiritual calling up to a macro-generational level.
Yes, he scales it up massively. He declares that the 2026 election cycle is, in his exact words, our generation's 1776.
1776.
That kind of historical framing is clearly designed to make the listener feel like they are participating in a literal revolution rather than just filling in a bubble in a midterm election. And what's interesting is who he is targeting with this revolutionary rhetoric. He appeals directly to millennials and Gen Z.
Which might seem surprising at first.
Yeah, why focus on the youth vote with such a traditionalist message?
Because he is tapping into very real, very tangible economic anxieties that those generations are currently drowning in. He argues to millennials and Gen Z that the American dream is dying for them.
It's a very visceral pitch.
It is. He doesn't just use abstract concepts. He points to plummeting fertility rates and the perceived mathematical impossibility of ever buying a house. He is looking at a generation that feels economically locked out. And he is attempting to draw those anxieties into his broader narrative of institutional betrayal. He is saying you can't buy a house because the oligarchs and the corrupt institutions stole your future.
So what does this new 1776 platform actually look like in practice? Strand outlines several specific tenets for restoring the American Republic. First, he wants to replace what he sees as congressional cowardice with courage, common sense, and Christian values.
Okay.
Second, he emphasizes restoring the nuclear family, establishing a common language, and celebrating Judeo-Christian heritage. He also calls for a government that heavily rewards merit, is strictly based on law and order, and is tightly bound by limited constitutional powers.
If we pull back and look at that platform as a whole, it is a deeply traditionalist, culturally conservative blueprint. But it's fused with a populist grievance.
Right, it blends the two.
He is explicitly tying national survival to cultural homogeneity. The idea that we must share a common language and a specific religious heritage to function as a society. He positions himself as the warrior fighting against what he describes as global oligarchs and what he calls an imported invasion of illegal voters.
And to fight this battle against the oligarchs, his campaign relies on a very specific grassroots funding strategy. He wants to bypass the massive establishment donors and the traditional PACs entirely.
Going straight to the people.
Straight to the people. He does this by asking his supporters to donate exactly $26 for the 2026 election cycle. That is a fascinating piece of marketing. It's symbolic, it's highly accessible to almost anyone, and it's perfectly branded.
It's a masterstroke in populist fundraising, really. By asking for just $26, he makes every single supporter feel like an active, vital investor in the dismantling of the establishment.
It's affordable revolution.
Exactly. It reinforces the people versus power dynamic. If you give $26, you aren't just a donor. You are a shareholder in this new 1776 revolution.
Now, to truly understand the architecture of his worldview, we have to look at how this interview transitions from domestic cultural grievances to global governance and the economy.
It all connects for him.
It does. It's fascinating how this intense domestic distrust bleeds directly into his view of the world stage. The source features a significant discussion on foreign policy, specifically praising a kinetic military action taken by President Trump.
A drone strike.
Right. The interview states this action killed a leader they refer to as Khamenei, who was accused of harassing the U.S. military, attacking naval vessels, and slaughtering 30,000 of his own citizens in the preceding 60 days.
We should pause here to provide some vital real-world context for the listener. The name Khamenei used in the source appears to be a phonetic mispronunciation or a conflation.
I noticed that.
Yeah, they are almost certainly referring to Qasem Soleimani, the powerful Iranian major general who was killed in a U.S. drone strike ordered by President Trump in early 2020. Soleimani was the commander of the Quds force and was widely considered the second most powerful figure in Iran, responsible for extensive extraterritorial military and clandestine operations.
Thank you for clarifying that. It really helps anchor the conversation. So in discussing this strike on Soleimani, the interview dives into a robust debate regarding the concept of the forever war.
Right.
They note that some critics claim this drone strike broke Trump's campaign promise to avoid foreign entanglements and risked starting World War III. But Strand and the interviewer vigorously defend the action. They argue the exact opposite.
They argue that utilizing massive, decisive, overwhelming kinetic power to completely neuter a threat is the only true way to end a forever war.
Peace through superior firepower.
Precisely. They frame the strike not as an it serves to reinforce Strand's central overriding theme, the necessity of decisive, unapologetic America First leadership.
Ah, I see.
He is contrasting
The bedrock of any free society is a legal system that is fair, impartial, and trusted by its people. Our judiciary is meant to be a blindfolded arbiter, weighing only the facts and the law. But what happens when the blindfold slips? What happens when the scales of justice seem tipped not by evidence, but by ideology or external pressure? Round the nation, we're seeing a worrying trend, a growing public distrust in our courts. Decisions that appear to defy precedent and logic are making many question if justice is truly blind anymore. This
During
isn't just a
sponsor read that
political
is
debate.
seamlessly integrated
It's an
into the
erosion
interview,
of the
you get a
very
clear
foundation of
snapshot
our
the
republic.
economic narrative being fed to
When
this
people
specific
lose
audience.
faith in the
sponsor reads tell
system
you
designed
exactly
to
who they think
protect
is
them,
listening.
Exactly.
the entire
The read
structure
claims that the US
becomes
dollar lost a
fragile.
staggering 30%
Courageous
of its buying
individuals,
power in the
lawyers,
Cites
whistleblowers,
JP Morgan predicting that
and
gold
everyday
will hit
citizens have
$6,300
risked their
an ounce.
careers and
And it notes the
reputations to
historic
sound
global
the
shift
alarm.
where foreign countries
They
are
have
supposedly
spoken out
dumping
against
US
what
dollars
they
and
see
holding
as
more
a
physical
departure
gold
from
than
the
US
principles of
We
impartial justice,
absolutely cannot
facing
overlook the
immense
placement and
personal
the psychological
sacrifice
impact
for
of that
upholding the
economic
rule
impact.
of law.
It links personal financial
Their
insecurity
stories remind
directly
us
back
that
to
the
Strand's
fight for a
message
fair
of
judiciary
institutional
is a
distrust.
fight
It's
for
all
the
part of the
soul
same
of our
puzzle.
nation.
It is. Think about the
Now
cumulative
is the
effect
time
on
for
listeners.
action.
If the
We must
dollar in your
demand
wallet
greater
is failing,
transparency
and the
and
elections in your town are
accountability
rigged,
from
and
our
the judges in your
judges.
courts are corrupt,
We
and
must
the establishment is
advocate
full of
for
cowards,
reforms
then
that
you are living in a
strengthen the
state of total
separation of
systemic
powers
You're under
and
siege.
insulate
Right.
our courts
That
from
environment
political
of pervasive fear and
influence.
instability is the
This
exact
includes
fertile
supporting
ground
nonpartisan
required for a message
judicial
like Strand's to
appointments
take root.
and robust
A promise
ethics
to burn down
oversight.
the old
The
establishment
future
and
of our
build a new
liberty depends on
1776
restoring
only
faith
appeals to
in
someone
our
who
justice
believes the current
system.
is already in ashes.
Let's work together
Wow.
to ensure that
Okay, let's take a
justice
deep breath
remains a
and get to bring this
promise
deep
for
dive to a
all,
close.
not a
We have covered an
privilege
incredibly
for a
intense
few.
journey through John Strand's
Thanks for
worldview
watching,
today.
We really have.
and be
We
sure to
started with this
subscribe
highly
for
specific,
more.
traumatic personal grievance
The bedrock of
regarding his
any free
366-day
society is a
imprisonment
legal
and
system
his severe
that is
claims of
fair,
malicious judicial
impartial,
corruption.
and
We mapped
trusted
out
by
his
its
sweeping
people.
demands for the Save America Act
Our
to combat
judiciary
alleged
is
election
meant
fraud.
to be a
And we
blindfolded
culminated in his
arbiter,
cultural, economic,
weighing
and political
only the
blueprint for a
facts
new
and the law.
1776 launch from a
But
prison
what
cell.
happens
As you
when the
process all of
blindfold
this information,
slips?
what stands out to you?
What
That's a good
happens when the
For me,
scales
it is
of
analyzing
justice
how
seem
seamlessly
tipped
this
not by
rhetoric blends
evidence,
extreme
but by
personal adversity
ideology
with
or
massive
external
macroeconomic
pressure?
and geopolitical narratives.
Around the nation, we're
Strand has
seeing a
constructed
worrying
highly
trend,
cohesive,
a growing
tightly
public
wound,
distrust in our
anti-establishment
courts.
platform aimed directly at
Decisions
voters who
that
feel every
appear
major
to defy
institution has
precedent
entirely
and
abandoned
logic
them.
are
It
making
truly
many
is a
question
masterclass
if
in modern
justice
narrative
is
building,
truly
regardless
blind
of where you
anymore.
personally stand on the politics.
This isn't just a political
and that brings us
debate.
to our final
It's an
provocative
erosion
thought for
of
you
the
to mull
very
over as you
foundation
go
of
about
our
your day.
republic.
We've seen how
When
Strand
people
uses his
lose
time
faith in
federal
the
prison
system
not as a
designed
mark
to
of
protect
shame,
them,
but as the ultimate
the
credential for
entire
his campaign.
structure
He wears it like a badge
becomes
of honor.
fragile.
He is a political martyr. in his own
Courageous
narrative.
individuals,
But think about the
lawyers,
broader historical
whistleblowers,
implications of this trend.
and
If
everyday
personal legal
citizens
battles,
have
criminal
risked
trials,
their
and prison
careers and
sentences increasingly
reputations
become the
to
primary
sound
origin
the
story
alarm.
and the main launch pads
They
for
have
congressional
spoken
campaigns,
out against
how does
what
that
they
fundamentally
see as a
change the nature of
departure from
lawmaking
the
in America?
principles of
This raises
impartial
such an essential
justice,
question for the
facing
future of the
immense
republic.
personal
If a wave of
sacrifice
future
for
lawmakers
upholding
is
the
elected
rule of
primarily
law.
on a mandate to punish
Their
or
stories
overhaul
remind
the
us
very
that the
judicial
fight
system
for a
that
fair
prosecuted
judiciary
them,
is a
what
fight
happens
for
to
the
the
soul of
historical
our nation.
constitutional balance of the three
Now
branches
is the
of
time
government?
for action.
Checks and balances.
We must
Does the
demand
legislature
greater
simply become a
transparency and
weaponized tool for
accountability
personal
from our
vindication?
judges.
And
We
if the
must
referee is
advocate for
constantly under threat of
reforms that
impeachment by the
strengthen the
players, can
separation
game
of
continue to
powers
function?
and
Something to
insulate
seriously
our
think
courts
about as we
from
head toward the next
political
election
influence.
cycle. Thank you so much
This
for joining us
includes
on this
supporting
deep dive.
nonpartisan
We hope it helped you
judicial
map out the
appointments
complex,
and
often
robust
turbulent
ethics
terrain of
oversight.
today's political
The
rhetoric.
future of our liberty
curious,
depends on
keep
restoring
questioning the
faith
information
in our
around you,
justice
and we'll see
system.
you on the next deep dive.
Let's work together to ensure that justice remains a promise for all, not a privilege for a few. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more. The bedrock of any free society is a legal system that is fair, impartial, and trusted by its people. Our judiciary is meant to be a blindfolded arbiter, weighing only the facts and the law. But what happens when the blindfold slips? What happens when the scales of justice seem tipped not by evidence, but by ideology or external pressure? Round the nation, we're seeing a worrying trend, a growing public distrust in our courts. Decisions that appear to defy precedent and logic are making many question if justice is truly blind anymore. This isn't just a political debate. It's an erosion of the very foundation of our republic. When people lose faith in the system designed to protect them, the entire structure becomes fragile. Courageous individuals, lawyers, whistleblowers, and everyday citizens have risked their careers and reputations to sound the alarm. They have spoken out against what they see as a departure from the principles of impartial justice, facing immense personal sacrifice for upholding the rule of law. Their stories remind us that the fight for a fair judiciary is a fight for the soul of our nation. Now is the time for action. We must demand greater transparency and accountability from our judges. We must advocate for reforms that strengthen the separation of powers and insulate our courts from political influence. This includes supporting nonpartisan judicial appointments and robust ethics oversight. The future of our liberty depends on restoring faith in our justice system. Let's work together to ensure that justice remains a promise for all, not a privilege for a few. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more.